Good afternoon and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine. And we are very delighted to be hosting Jonathan Karl, who's here to talk about his new book, Retribution, Donald Trump and the Campaign That Changed America. John, of course, is the chief Washington correspondent for ABC News and co-anchor of This Week with George Stephanopoulos. He's covered every major beat in Washington, including the White House, Capitol Hill, the Pentagon, and the State Department. And he's reported from the White House under 4 presidents and 14 press secretaries. He's also a former president of the White House Correspondents Association. This is actually John's 4th book in 5 years, and they've all been about Trump, and it probably won't be his last one about Trump. And John has known Trump for a long time. He first met him back in 1994. The first book, The Front Row at the Trump Show, was about the first 3 years of Trump's initial presidency. Next came Betrayal, about the final chaotic, tumultuous year of Trump's previous time in the White House. And that was followed by Tired of Winning, about Trump in exile, having left the presidency as a disgraced pariah within American politics. In his new book, which John says was actually a little more challenging to write than the previous 3, in it, John chronicles not only Trump's return to the White House, but also Joe Biden's fall and the failed presidential campaign of Kamala Harris. So this is, as John has described it, a sort of a multi-act play. There have, of course, in recent months been other books about the 2024 presidential election, but that event marked such a momentous turn, and its impact on U.S. history and democracy is likely to be so profound and lasting that it's worth revisiting with John, and I don't have to tell you all that because you're here. But his book also contains some fresh material and insights. Among the access that he had covering and reporting on the campaign and the transition were regular phone calls with Trump. You know, they hardly have what would be called a amicable, friendly relationship. I mean, Trump has called John a third-rate reporter and a real scumbag. I guess maybe for Trump those are terms of affection and endearment. But Trump almost always answers John's calls, John says. So John portrays Trump this time around as being more in control than ever and having more of a vision about how he wants to reshape the country. Further, Trump appears with a much bigger chip on his shoulder now because of how victimized he feels he was after his first term, and of course he has around him a staff and structure totally dedicated to carrying out his wishes. John calls Trump Redux a potentially, quote, more consequential, more radical president, and undoing the damage Trump is doing to the psyche of the country will, John writes, be much harder. It's a very sobering assessment indeed. Now, in conversation with John will be Katherine Faulders, who in her own dozen years with ABC News has held a range of reporting positions, including the White House, Capitol Hill, and investigations, and she's currently the managing editor of the network's Washington Bureau. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jonathan Karl and Katherine Faulders.
Wow, it's a packed house. You said hold these mics close, right? That was the one instruction. Well, thanks everybody for coming. We're excited about this conversation. I love this book. I was actually thinking, I've read this book multiple times, but I've read it chapter by chapter. I haven't read it in the narrative arc form. So I finally did this the past week, and it lived for me in different ways. You know, because before I was reading chapter 8, then chapter 1, as you and I obviously were consulting on the book. But Brad, something that you just mentioned to start off the conversation, this book is much different than your other books about Trump. Obviously, your other books about Trump have been based on real reporting, talking to Trump, shoe leather journalism. But in this book, you focus quite a bit on the Democrats, about how the Democrats lost, about how Joe Biden lost. You talk about a plan, for example, devised by Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi to ensure a kind of mini primary, for example, if Biden were to drop out of the race, which he did. Explain your thinking behind that. And I bring that up because when reading the book in order, in chapter order, you kind of bounce back and forth between Trump and what was happening in the Democratic Party.
Well, thank you. By the way, first of all, Brad, thank you for having us here. Politics and Prose is such a treasure. It's a Washington treasure. It's a national treasure. Thank you. And it's amazing to be here with Katherine, who is truly, as I write in the acknowledgments of the books, first of all, a big part of this book. She helped me with this, as she's helped me with every single one of them. Is truly one of the great reporters in Washington, and one of the things this book does is document some of the groundbreaking reporting that Katherine did, particularly on the criminal investigations into Donald Trump. She was always ahead of just about everybody. So thank you for being here. Look, I knew that I wanted to. Well, first of all, my last book, I think, what was the subtitle? It was something like The End of the Grand Old Party, and the previous one was The Final Act of the Trump Show. I mean, I keep thinking I've written the last book, and I really thought I had. But once I saw the Shakespearean drama playing out surrounding Joe Biden, I knew that I wanted to write a book about the 2024 campaign. This is before we had any idea who was going to win. And so I started tracking, everything. I mean, first of all, it's our day-to-day jobs, but as you're doing your day-to-day jobs as a reporter, I keep a detailed journal. It's like the raw material of the book, and I'm writing stuff that happens, my thoughts about what's happening, but also the things I don't get, what I want to investigate further, answers I can't get in real time, what do I want to go back and try to dig up. And I realized that we had a great story, an immensely consequential story. And it was Katherine who suggested to me at one point, why don't you just call him every day? I was like, Katherine, what are you talking about? Just
I did say that.
Just keep calling him.
So I call him every single day from this point out, that the rest of the campaign, I think you thought I was crazy.
I thought she was a little crazy, but I started calling, I mean, as we got into it, like every couple of days or every 2 or 3 days. But I was also talking very regularly with Hunter Biden. So, I mean, I don't know how many people are having both of those conversations at once, but and Steve Bannon, and I was having this series of conversations. Anyway, so I knew I had more. This was not a Trump book. I mean, it is a story about Trump's return to power, what it means for America, what the story of the campaign. But it is about more than that.
You mentioned the phone calls, and I just want you to talk a little bit about, yes, your calls with Donald Trump. You mentioned over there, Brad, the names that he's called you publicly, privately on the phone.
Thankfully, you didn't go through all of them. Thank you. You
yes,
just did a couple.
that was nice. You
that.
give him a break. But you talk about in the book, I believe, after we had that conversation the first time that you got him on the phone.
Yeah. The first time because look, I've known Trump, as you mentioned, since 1994. I've spoken to him. I've interviewed him God only knows how many times. I've spoken to him over the phone a lot over the years. But previously, before this campaign, if I wanted to get Trump on the phone, I would call. Well, in the old days, I would call the secretary at the Trump organization. She was a woman named Norma Federer. She was practically a member of the Trump family, kind of raised the kids in many ways. And her desk was right outside of Trump's on the 25th floor of Trump Tower, and she would, I mean, get me to him almost immediately. Or later, Hope Hicks, when he was a candidate at the White House. Sometimes I would call the White House switchboard to get through to throw. Really funny number. I think what's the number? It's 202-456. 1414 or
That's what
4.
it is.
Yeah, okay.
Anybody
Anyway,
can
just in
call.
case, it's not a secret number. I don't think it works as well as it used to. But anyway, I would never call Trump directly on his phone. I mean, who does that? I mean, you got to go through somebody, right? So Butler happens, the shooting in Butler, and I'm in Milwaukee because the convention that's a Saturday night. The convention's starting on Monday, and we're all getting ready for we're going to broadcast our Sunday show from Milwaukee, the whole thing. And I'm on all night long. Katherine, you're on all night long as well. We're covering this absolutely, horrific scene in Butler, and ABC is full live coverage until the early morning hours, and then we're at it again all day Sunday. And I get up Monday to go do Good Morning America, like 6 o'clock. I'm leaving where I'm staying, and it just occurred to me. First of all, I was really worried that the country could fall apart. I can't even begin to express how I had this feeling that, first of all, if he had actually been killed, we would have been in the middle of God knows what. But even with him surviving, his reaction to that was going to determine where we went and how much the country got inflamed. And there were some signs early on. J.D. Vance, his immediate response was the Democrats, first they tried to impeach him, now they're trying to kill him. First they're trying to impeach him, they tried to, and I'm like, if that's the attitude that Trump takes, we are in for a lot of hurt in this country, is what I thought. So I called him, and I figured I would leave. It's the first call.
Yeah.
I figured I would leave a voicemail message, which I did. I didn't expect him to answer it. I didn't know that he would hear it. And just to say, I'm really sorry about what happened in Butler. I'm glad to hear that you are okay. We'll see you when you get to Milwaukee. Something simple like that. And that's like before 7 in the morning, before Good Morning America. And a few hours later, the convention is underway. They're doing the open gavel, kind of the ceremonial stuff. Trump has just announced that J.D. Vance is his running mate. I think a story you might have helped break, but so this is all playing out. And I'm at the ABC News booth in the Milwaukee convention, sitting next to David Muir, because we're about to start our special coverage of the convention. It's early afternoon, I forget exactly what time. And my phone rings, and on the phone it says Donald Trump, which, by the way, usually when you get a phone call from somebody that's like a senior executive or something,
no caller ID.
It's like no caller ID, It's Donald Trump.
Better take that.
I just motioned, because we're all hot mic'd, by the way, because we're not on yet, but I'm hooked up. I just lean over and I show it to David Muir, because he's we're getting ready to go on at some point, and I just want him to know that I'm kind of on the phone over here, and I'm not just ordering lunch, he stayed on the phone with me for almost 15 minutes. Think about all that's happened. He's just been shot. He's just chosen his running mate. His convention is just starting. And he's just talking. And it was an extraordinary conversation, because I was first just reiterated what I said in the voicemail, but then I started asking him questions, and he was saying, you wouldn't believe the people who are calling me. You wouldn't believe the calls I've gotten. And I'm thinking, yeah, I called you, man. That must have been amazing. He's like, Jeff Bezos called me. Can you believe it? And we knew that Biden had called him, so I asked him about the Biden call. He was very complimentary of Joe Biden, and he told me that he was going to now stress unity at the convention. He seemed like somebody that was still dealing with the fact that an inch or so the other direction, he could have been killed. And he really sounded different. But that was the beginning of it. That was the beginning of...
One of my other favorite anecdotes that you have in this book about, and then we don't have to talk about Trump phone calls, but about your phone calls with Trump was the day after the election.
Yeah.
When, you were talking to him and you said, well, you won, congratulations. He said, or something. He said, on what?
That was
It was a bizarre.
that was just so nuts. And at this point, I had been calling him every day for at least, for the days leading into the election. Talked to him on election day.
Mm.
So this is the day after. Election night at a if you were working, helping to anchor or you're part of the election coverage for a television number, you're up all night because we're up until there are results, really. Unless there aren't, and then we're up until like 4 a.m, and then we're back on at 7. I mean, it's like, so I was up all night. I think we did get off at like 4, and then I had to go do Good Morning America, which was at a different location from our election night coverage. So, I mean, I hadn't slept a wink, and Good Morning America's over. I come back to my hotel, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna call him, and I'll leave a voicemail message congratulating him. Now, come on, he's been up all night too, tracking all this stuff. How late did he go in West Palm Beach? I mean, he was like.
I was down there. I think we cleared out of that room about, I don't know, 4 or 2:33, 4 at that point.
I mean, it's ridiculous. So, and he answers the phone, and he sounds terrible. But of course, he sounds terrible. He's been up all night. Hello. Sometimes when he would answer my calls, he would say, "Hey, Jonathan," which made me, I don't know if he just remembered my number, if he had me in his mailbox or what it was. And other times it would be as, "Who's this?" So this was one of those "Who's this" moments. And I said, "Mr. President-elect, it's Jonathan Karl. I'm just calling to say congratulations." And I figured that was easy. On what, Jonathan? On what? You tell me. On what? He wanted to hear me say that he had won. It was like, I compared it to the scene. Any you guys watch Breaking Bad? The Bryan Cranston character, he's got the other drug dealers that he's completely bested, and they have to kind of come to beg for mercy. And say my name. That's what it felt like, but it was pretty wild.
It's amazing.
At first, I thought he was making a joke, but he wasn't. It wasn't a joke.
Say it. Say it.
Say it again.
So just obviously into the meat of your book, the title, Retribution. I know we talked about this a lot. This was obviously a title that you settled on pretty much in the beginning. Not everybody's pretty familiar with the quote from Donald Trump at one of his rallies, "I am your retribution." It was very clear that this campaign, if he were to win, obviously setting up his presidency as a presidency of retribution. I think it's interesting to compare what was happening on the campaign trail, but also now, to if you look at the first Trump administration, which seems at this point, he had people around him, and you've talked a bit about this in the context of this book. He had people around him, like whether it was the White House counsel, whether it was the former Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, whether it was one of his chiefs of staff, John Kelly, people who were very serious people who you could argue would rein him in. But this is different, and we notice this now in the Trump presidency, but also when you were reporting on this book, what Trump was saying during the campaign. He's really, what he's doing now is changing the culture. And not just changing the culture for a year or 4 years, but in the years to come, which was actually much different than the first term. How do you, and of course writing this, the arc of this book, and you've known this since writing it, but how does that live for you in terms of looking back at the other books you've written about that first term versus now, which is arguably a much different time?
First of all, Retribution was something I had in my mind even before the election was over, but I absolutely decided the day after the election that's the title. I mean, before I'd written a single chapter from beginning to end, I knew that was the title. My last book, Tired of Winning, had a chapter called Come Retribution, and I think of all of my books, that may be the chapter I'm the most proud of. It was. I talked about his first rally in Waco, Texas. I had written a book as a cub reporter for the New York Post called The Right to Bear Arms, which was about the militia movement and the attack on the Oklahoma City federal building by Timothy McVeigh. And I couldn't believe that, he was launching a campaign back in Waco with some of the same themes that animated the book the people I was writing about in that book I had written, 30 years before. And he used that term, I am your retribution. To answer your question about how entirely different this is and how much more consequential, one of the really good things about writing a book and why I've come back to this torture 4 times is it forces you to take a step back and say, what is actually happening? What does it mean? It's not just the reporting, but it's a way you kind of think about what has happened. And when I went back and looked at Front Row at the Trump Show, which is a book that came out just as COVID hit, but it was written before all of that. It was the story of the Trump 2016 campaign, his takeover of Washington, but it was also like my relationship with him and that whole story. And I called it the Trump Show because I had made the case that Trump saw the presidency as the world's greatest reality TV show, that he was the star of the show, he was the executive producer, he was the chief publicist, he was the spokesperson, he was everything. And it was what really mattered was being the center of attention. And on that one metric, his presidency was wildly successful. I mean, the world was riveted by what was happening. And he did things like the meeting with Kim Jong-un in Singapore, that first meeting, which was like, I mean, did it accomplish anything? I mean, no. The North Korean nuclear program went on as it was. But it was a spectacle unlike anything that I had ever actually witnessed covering White Houses. So, but what I noticed, when you go back and really think about it, he leaves office the way he left office, and I did a book about that. But he leaves office, and basically, it's all gone. I mean, there was very little lasting impact from Trump's first term. It was shockingly ephemeral for something that had riveted our attention and caused so much concern and anxiety and all that it entailed. It was actually Biden came in and the world went on. This time, that is not the case. And I don't think he is just trying to be the center of attention anymore. He is, first of all, he's much more concerned about legacy than he ever was. That's why all this Nobel Peace Prize talk, the talk of the building of this massive ballroom at the White House, all the gold and the redoing of everything. He didn't do really any of that. I mean, there was a little extra gold in the first term, but not much. And the way that he has taken on the courts, the way that he has staffed his administration with people that will be first and foremost loyal to him. First time around, he brought in people. Remember, he said, "I'm going to bring in the best, the very best." And we kind of, looked at that because some people weren't the very best. but he did bring in people that had real credentials. 4-star Marine generals, John Kelly and Jim Mattis. These are serious, accomplished people long before they had ever met Donald Trump. Rex Tillerson is an unusual choice for Secretary of State, for sure. But he's also the CEO of ExxonMobil. The guy ran one of the biggest companies in the world.
Mark Milley.
Mark
now
Milley.
He's taking down his portraits from the E-wing of the...
I mean, some serious... Jeff Sessions is the first attorney general, former federal judge, a United States senator. Bill Barr comes in after him, a guy that had already been attorney. He felt that he had to bring in people that had credentials. But what he found out is every single person we just mentioned, Trump thought betrayed him. Every single one of those people with all their credentials. So now you know what? I can't swear here, right?
Well,
but
now they're
it's
the
like,
targets.
Yeah. So now it's, it's his former defense team running the Justice Department. It's Pete Hegseth, the guy that that said so many nice things about him on Fox Weekend morning show. He's the head of the Pentagon. It's loyalty first and foremost.
It's loyalty first and foremost. That's right. And speaking of his former defense team, and you mentioned Trump taking on the courts, I think you set up and part of the first bit of this book that you write about is about that trial, the hush money trial, when Trump was in court every day. But I think that moment is pivotal in a lot of different ways. I'm curious your thoughts. He was bringing the campaign to him there with the surrogates in a lot of ways, where he said, if I can't go out there, I only have Wednesdays off, right? Yeah. Then I'll just bring my future Attorney General Pam Bondi here, my future FBI Director Kash Patel. They'll come out here and they'll speak for me before cameras. But also, how do you, when we were thinking about Trump at that time, he was on trial, but he was also facing federal charges for classified documents for January 6th. In some ways, you could argue that this going first really, set up, this quest for retribution in a way. And how do you think that experience that you described so vividly with the rat traps in that courthouse, you and I were there, how do you think that experience informed the rest of his campaign and actually specifically this quest for retribution?
I mean, I think it's central. So the first chapter of the book, after the introduction, is called "The Felon and the Front Runner," and it really describes the fundamental fact of this election from the Trump perspective, which was he was either going to face the very real possibility of going to prison, or he was going to become the most powerful president of our lifetimes. I mean, that was the fork in the road, and you spent more time there than I did. You were there for a lot of that trial. I went and attended while Michael Cohen was testifying. I wanted to just see it. I wanted to see what it was like, and it's hard. And I described the scene that just I witnessed, which was also the scene that Trump witnessed. You come into that building. The first thing I noticed was the big rat traps outside the front door. Those black plastic rat traps.
There's no gold there either.
You come in. It's 100 Center Street. It's a great old, building. Was it like built in the 20s? It's like it's 100 years old or so. I don't think it's been renovated really since. There are signs warning hazardous, asbestos removal underway. It's dark. It's dingy. It's got those fluorescent lights that flicker. You go through a creaky old elevator to get to what floor was the?
You're testing me. 9, 11.
So whatever it was on, you go up this thing. It's right down the hallway from this.
Sometimes you'd have to get out a different elevator because it wasn't working and run up the stairs.
And this is where Donald Trump is compelled. Remember, he's under arrest. He's compelled to be in court, no choice, 4 days a week because it's not in session on Wednesdays. And judge comes into this courtroom. He has to stand up, and he has to sit there silently day after day after day in this place that is probably freaking him out from the germs and everything else, and listen to what's said from the witness stand. So Stormy Daniels is up there, testifying. That he asked her to hit him on the behind with a magazine with his picture on it, right? Isn't that what it was? What was the? I mean, this is like just mortifying stuff that he has to sit there, and Michael Cohen for 2 days of testimony, and I think it just bore into his head. And by the way, the trial starts after he has effectively clinched the Republican nomination. He's the king of the world in terms of the Republican politics, and yet he's common, accused criminal in this courthouse. And I think, and by the way, can you tell the story? Because it's one of my favorite stories in this book. And you're the one who came to me with it. This is maybe it doesn't necessarily mean much in the scheme of things, but it's probably the single craziest thing in the book. And I'll just set you up. It's at Trump Tower the morning before. The trial has been on for several weeks. It's almost over, and he's having a meeting up in his, room, his residence in Trump Tower, way up this top floor, and he's meeting with his legal team, and they're about to head down to the courthouse.
I think this was actually it's an incredible story because it says a lot about Trump, but also the way we figured this out was also bizarre. Trump came before, I believe it was at the end of May 21st. And it was at the end of trial where he would sit in there, and then there was a camera at the end where he could give his remarks, which he did every day. And he made, and I'm opening this book to see exactly what he said. It was, he made comments at the end of court one day to reporters. He says, "We appreciate you suffering with us. You've been with us for 5 weeks. We'll be resting pretty quickly," meaning the defense was going to rest the case, but this is how he says it. So, "We'll be resting pretty quickly," meaning rest the case. "I won't be resting. I don't rest. I'd like to rest sometimes, but I don't get to rest." And be like, huh.
What was that?
Something must have happened on this day that made him think about this. So anyway, tabling that for a second and coming back to this, when we were reporting this out, I asked a couple sources of mine, what was the craziest thing that nobody knows about that happened during this trial? Just a really good anecdote. And the anecdote was, on this very same day that Trump says he doesn't like to rest, the elevator, what was it? One elevator was working. Only one elevator in Trump Tower was working, which is a security risk for Trump because the Secret Service does not want him only on the one working elevator. The other elevators must work, but they were not working. And what happened was, so he couldn't take the elevator. So he had to walk down, and I know he's on the 66th floor.
Which is really the 55th floor because he lies about how many stories the thing is. But that's a separpt story.
It's
Those
really
of you
the
that read front
55th.
row.
I probably could have walked
It's
down.
still pretty freaking high.
Still
Okay.
high.
Yeah.
But at one point, there actually is, at one point along his long journey down to the bottom of Trump Tower, there actually is the ability to exit. He could have crossed over and then gone down another elevator. He didn't do that and took all of the stairs. His legal team actually was tired, and they said, "We're not going to do this. We're going to go across, and then we'll meet you down there." But Trump didn't. And the most fascinating part about all of this was then he gets in the car, and we're told that
You ever tried going down 55 flights of stairs?
I don't want to try to do it.
I mean, this is a guy that doesn't even like to walk up to the putting green on the golf course.
Yeah.
He takes the golf cart right up there. So, I mean, anyway.
No. So he gets into the car on his way to court, and there are people saying, that's insane. You just did that. You actually should. There's a camera at the court. You should tell everybody about what you just did.
Can you imagine Joe Biden doing that? No way. Come on. Tell everybody what you just did.
You should do that. And he said, absolutely under no circumstance will I do that. Will I reveal that I have done that? Why? Why won't you do that? Because it would reveal that the elevators in Trump Tower weren't working. So he didn't say it, but then he kind of did. At the end.
But then he doesn't think, I can't rest. But basically, they're all like sworn to secrecy. You must never talk about this.
Never.
Nobody can ever mention that there was an elevator out at Trump Tower.
Nobody. And I think it's just an amazing story. But speaking about the legal elements of this and bringing it back full circle to your full book, I think there are there's a lot of characters in this book, but two central characters that I find are important on many levels, important to the narrative arc of your book, important to Trump's campaign, and also moving forward from this point into the next 3 years of Trump's presidency, also two central figures. And those people who, frankly, one is the product of the other, if you think about it. They're parallel characters, in my view, Steve Bannon and Boris Epstein. They're fascinating, they will remain fascinating, and they still are huge central players in Trump's decision-making now. You write a lot about them in your book, but I just want to hear you talk a little bit about them and their influence over Trump's campaign, but also what I think even more importantly, their influence now when Trump is in the White House and now on consequential decisions that he's making.
Yeah, both, I think, two central players, and also
And should we say who they are?
People who,
If you don't know, Steve Bannon,
the former chief strategist, who's now, he's been running the War Room. Neither one of these guys are actually in the White House. And Boris Epstein is, he had briefly served in the first term, was kind of forced out, and then worked his way back into Trump's orbit. He's an outside lawyer. He's the one behind the efforts to go after the law firms. That is Boris, to go after the media organizations, to threaten the lawsuits. When you see a nutty lawsuit going after somebody, Boris is somewhere. He's a guy. He's a Georgetown law graduate. He worked at Milbank Tweed after law school. He's got serious credentials, but he is Trump's guy. He's the one that basically led, he wasn't the lead attorney on any of those criminal cases, but he was in charge of the legal team. So his role in some ways was more important. So a lot of people in Trump's orbit don't like Steve Bannon and don't like Boris Epstein. They resent him. They resent both of them. They think that that Trump listens to them and goes off into areas that they would rather him not go off into. But when Trump looks at those two, he says, those are my loyalists. And Boris, you're the guy who helped me fight my way back. When my back was against the wall and everybody else abandoned me, Boris Epstein was there, and so was Steve Bannon.
And Steve Bannon, Trump will say, went to jail for him,
and
which
Steve
he did.
4 months in prison because he refused to cooperate with Liz Cheney and the January 6th committee. That is like he proved his loyalty to Donald Trump. And they are both, and there are stories, chapter and verse, about just how central they have been at key moments, even as they are not actually on the White House staff. Probably more influence than if they were on the White House staff, I would
More
argue.
influential, and I know you've talked some about this, but I am just so struck by Bannon's role in Donald Trump's decision-making around that influence meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky, where that ended very poorly with him being berated in the Oval Office. Steve Bannon had just spoken to him.
Yeah, I mean, this is a remarkable thing that I certainly didn't know at the time. Nobody, I don't think, knew at the time, except for the people directly involved. Zelensky came on a Friday in February. Earlier in the week, Trump was having a meeting of his entire national security team to prepare for Zelensky's visit. They were talking about doing this deal to share Ukraine's natural resources, in exchange for some kind of a, help with dealing with Russia. It was you had the vice president was there, the secretary of state was there, the national security advisor was there, the secretary of defense, Scott Bessent, the treasury secretary, was there, and they're meeting. And Trump does not like what he's hearing because he's, he likes getting a share of Ukraine's natural resources, but doesn't think he's getting enough. So he knows that Bannon is like a big critic of Zelensky and Ukraine and all of this. So he tells his national security advisor, get Steve Bannon on the phone. And the guy calls him. Bannon sees the call, I later learned. Bannon was on his show, this podcast he does called War Room. So
For 4 hours a day, by the way.
So he sent it to voicemail and said, I'll call you at noon when it's over. And then Trump doesn't like that answer, so Trump calls him directly on his phone. And now Bannon's got to take the call. So he throws to a commercial break and says, I'll be right back, and doesn't say why. And he's on for the next half hour. Bannon's show, by the way, I went back to pull it up to see what was going on. He had been interviewing some guy in Rome.
And then he was filling in for him, right?
Yeah, and then when they came back to the commercial, the guy he was interviewing was now anchoring his show. And so he puts the speakerphone on through his iPhone. Imagine this, first of all,
on speakerphone with all of these national security officials who are making decisions about this, like Secretary of the Treasury, the National Security Advisor, who else? Marco Rubio, the Vice President, maybe at some point.
Yes,
but
he was
Steve
there.
Bannon.
But Bannon is the one lecturing them about why this thing that they've worked so hard to negotiate is no good. And Bannon starts referring to Zelensky as that punk Zelensky, as in that punk Zelensky, if you do this, he's going to want security guarantees. You can't trust that punk Zelensky. You can't trust the Putin either, but you definitely can't trust that punk Zelensky. And it just gets them all riled up, and I think it very much set the tone for that extraordinary scene we saw in the Oval Office. And again, this is a guy that runs a podcast that hasn't been working for Trump since 2017, 2018, 2017, but is at that moment in time more influential than the actual people on the national security team.
Which is amazing to think about because that happens so much more, of course, now than it did the first time. And I know we obviously want to leave some time in 5 to 10 minutes or so for questions. And I know there's a lot to get to with you, John, that I would love to get to. But I just want to talk a little bit about the Trump transition. I know you wrote this in your book. and you looked at me like I had two heads when I said this to you. But I said, I think this is going to be an important story. I think we should start focusing on this.
I think you were more dramatic than that. So it's the fall campaign. I think it's like September. And by the way, Kamala is like rising. You know, I mean, it really looks like the Democrats have, you know, gotten their act together. You know, Biden's out. Kamala just had this very successful convention. The debate was a big success. And Katherine like says to me, you know, and she's like constantly burrowing in. That's why she's such a great reporter. She like, the key thing to be a reporter is not just like jump at the thing that everybody's looking at that moment. It's like it's like, what do they say about soccer? You got to go where the ball's going to be, not where the ball is. Or that's hockey. That's Gretzky, right? Anyway, whatever. It's true of a lot of things. You know, she tells me, I think this Trump transition may be the story of our time or something like that. I mean, you were very dramatic.
I
like,
was.
This could be the most important story.
You're like,
of our time. And I was like, oh, okay, Katherine. But you were right. You were totally right. And
The scenes you describe in this book.
Yes.
And we spent time together down there in Florida.
Mar-a-Lago, we had some very interesting adventures in Mar-a-Lago, yes.
But it's just worth, and you and I covered the first Trump transition too, which was much different. There was government space right by the White House. Mike Pence was in charge of it. And Chris Christie.
There's a thing called the National Transition Act. Isn't that what it's called? That was set up to ensure a smooth transition between administrations. And you know the transitions start before the election, and there are full staffs. There's office space. So you know even if you're a candidate that's like doomed to lose, you know you get to pretend you know what you would do if you're going to be president. You know, I mean, because you don't know. You never know what's going to happen. But in 2016. The Trump transition had space right near a couple blocks from the White House. They had access to FBI background checks. They could, you know, for potential nominees, all that stuff. So yes, but this time it was all done out of Mar-a-Lago. I mean, it was a very unusual scene.
And I love the way you set up this chapter. It's called Meet the New Boss. And you start it with
Same as the old boss.
Same as the old boss, exactly. And you start it with, I just think that this just tees up Trump's whole presidency now, and also how his transition would be. But you start it with this great reporting from Enrique Tarrio.
Oh yeah,
You don't
this
remember?
is crazy. Oh,
This is crazy. Who this is? This was the leader of the Proud Boys militia group. You heard his name a lot during January 6th, and when we talked about Donald Trump. I just want you to tell this story about Tarrio and how he watched the election result, or I shouldn't say watched, heard, right? How he was listening to the election results. He was in prison at the time.
Yeah. This is, so he also had the single longest sentence of any of
Yes.
the January 6th. Was it 22 years or 23 years? Single longest sentence of any of them. And this, first of all, just a quick, I didn't set out to write a traditional campaign book because this was not a traditional campaign. So if you're looking for like the decisions made on ad buys or what the campaign manager was saying to this or that, you know, I didn't really, so election night, I didn't like do when I'm describing, I need to get from the election to the story of this great transition, of this wild transition. But I didn't want to spend a lot of time analyzing exit polls and all that. So you guys already know all that. This is like what happened after. So I wanted to get a sense for how the January 6th prisoners heard the news that Trump had won. And it took me a while. I was trying to find, you know, did any of them hear it in prison? Were they able to hear the results of what was going on? So Enrique Tarrio was the story that I found. Guy, again, with the single longest sentence. He was in prison in Mississippi. And he knew that if Trump won, that he was going to, he says this, he says he knew that Trump was going to pardon everybody. He knew he'd be free. He also knew that if Trump didn't win, he was going to spend most of the next 2 decades, you know, behind bars. So you might say he had a lot at stake in the results of the election. When you're in prison, I've never been in prison. I don't know about you guys, but you can buy these transistor radios at the commissary, and I also describe it's how you can watch the television because you know these prisons often have a place where the inmates during certain hours can watch television and they can listen to the sound. Television's on the other side usually of glass, and then you can listen to it on your transistor radio. And so Tario is sitting there in his prison cell listening to the results on his radio. And as the evening goes on, the results are coming in, the batteries run out. So now he can't hear anything. It's done. But he knows that there's a guard shack outside of his cell, not too far away, and he starts like banging on his door. He yells out to one of the guards because he can hear that they're watching television. He assumes they're watching the results, but he can't really, And he says this guard, who Tario described to me as pure MAGA.
100. I was going to say 100% MAGA.
100% MAGA. And he says, "Can you please turn it up? Can you turn it loud so I can hear?" So they do turn it up for him, but it's still hard to hear. So he lies on the floor of his cell, and it's not one of these with bars. It's one of these with it's like metal, door, but there's a little space between the floor and the bottom of the door. So he lies on the floor and he listens to the crack, listening to the results. And it's CNN, which, by the way, if he had been listening to Fox, he would have gotten the results a little bit earlier because Fox called the results earlier than any other network. But he's listening to CNN, and CNN projects that the state of Pennsylvania is going to go to Trump. And that's when he knows that Trump has won. So he's exalted in excitement. So he jumps up and he starts banging on the door. And the other inmates in that part of in that cell block, who all know Tario as the January 6th guy, he's got a reputation in the prison, they start banging too. So you have this celebration in this prison of the election results. All these prisoners banging on their cell doors. Anyway, just an extraordinary scene.
And it really tees up what you'll hopefully read is the beginning of the craziness of the transition. So I know we'll take questions in 2 minutes, but I just want to read you one quote.
Uh-oh.
I know. This quote is from a young journalist in 1995. This person wrote a book. They write, "We face a crisis of confidence in our democratic system of government, and it is a crisis that has been caused largely by the irresponsibility of our political leaders. The ranting of conspiracy theorists can easily be dismissed, but distrust of our federal government extends far beyond the minority that believes the paranoid fanatics of the right and far left. There is something wrong with even a small minority when even a small minority of the population feels this way. But when 2 out of every 5 Americans say they fear their own government, the problem is approaching crisis levels." That was written in 1995 by you.
Where did you find that?
In your first book,
Oh my God.
The Right to Bear Arms.
I've been writing the same book since 1995.
I was going to say, that time was the rise of the militia movement, as you know. That's what the book was about. In the U.S., following things like the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, the Waco, Texas raid. I wonder how you would reflect on that quote now and how things feel compared to when you first ever wrote that book. I think you answered it by saying you've been writing the first book.
Yeah. I mean, there was a historian named Richard Hofstadter who wrote a book called The Paranoid Style in American Politics. I see many of you are familiar with that book. That book was written in the 50s. There is definitely something kind of inherently American about distrust of institutions, distrust of government, that can be very healthy, or it can be very damaging. And it can show itself through conspiracy theories. I mean, we're just down the road here from Comet Pizza, and we see how these can be very dangerous. And that's why I mentioned. I'm glad you found that quote, and I mentioned "Come Retribution," the chapter in "Tired of Winning," where I hearkened back to my experience writing that book and how I was feeling these same echoes. I think what we're seeing now, and look, this is far beyond Donald Trump, This is far beyond his political movement. I fear that we're entering a stage where nobody will believe anything about anything. You know, part of that is what we see with artificial intelligence. Part of it is the way people have been misled, you know, fundamentally. Part of it is what our leaders tell us. You know, Trump's pounding these conspiracy theories about the elections and about mail-in votes and about much more. And it's so much accelerated since I wrote those words in 1995. I mean, and maybe some of you would believe this, but I can't tell you how many people have told me that they don't believe this happened. That they believe the Butler shooting was staged. And that's where we are. People are not going to believe anything. And when I say it, I try to tell people, you know, I know the photographer that took this picture. Mm-hmm. I know the other photographers that were with him who witnessed everything happening right there. Corey Comparator, who I write about in the book, was killed. I mean, this is real. 2 other people had their lives changed because they were injured really badly, struck by bullets. It's you know, I mean, it happened. I mean, we can debate whether or not it was a bullet that hit Trump's ear or whatever. Okay, I mean, but people are not prone to believe what they are seeing with their own eyes because it is so easy now to manipulate what they are seeing with their own eyes.
And with that, turn it over to some questions.
So there was an analyst at Putin, who wrote a book called "Nothing is True and Everything is Possible," and that's what you're saying. And it's not an accident that Trump is a big admirer of Putin. My question is about Zelensky. Isn't it possible that Putin, Trump's whole approach to Zelensky is not about Steve Bannon? It's about Trump's theory of an obsession with domination. Someone said, the powerful take what they can, and the rest suffer what they must.
Yeah. So, and there's a long-standing debate over what influence Steve Bannon really has on Trump. Some people think it's way overstated. Some people think it's understated. In terms of this case, Trump is driving the train when it comes to Zelensky. And Trump is the one that says, get Steve Bannon on the phone, not because he's going to be influenced by what Steve Bannon says, but because he knows what Steve Bannon says and he believes it, and he's going to get his people on the same page. So yes.
That's the way I saw it too. So I'd like to ask you to go 100,000 feet up and look back into history, as well as I'm going to ask you to try to predict the future.
Come a little closer to the mic.
I'm going to ask you to look back in history and also look into the future. Looking back in history, I don't understand how in the 70s Watergate happens and there's a reaction in Congress with Republicans who go and tell the president, you're out of line, it's over, you need to be gone, right? And then flash forward to the present, and there's just all this tolerance. We don't need tapes. The president says things in the media. We see the photographs of secure documents all over Mar-a-Lago. So we all know what's happening. But the Republican leadership in Congress is just like, if I have to tolerate it to get reelected, that's what I'll do. That's the way it seems to me. So I'm wondering what has happened to us as a country that within my lifetime, Republicans tell a president or the party members the same as the president say, you're out of line, you got to go. And then here we are. And the other question I want to ask you is, how is this going to end? I mean, we're headed in a direction that's inconsistent with our history.
Yeah.
But when is somebody just going to stand up and say, well, I don't want to sell out our democracy just to win an election or get a tax cut?
Thank you for the questions and the comments. I mean, what you've pointed to with the change in the Congress is a really good one. You know, it was Bannon actually who recently described this Congress as playing essentially the same role as the Russian Duma. And I don't think he was complaining about it, but didn't sound like a compliment. You know, that's another big difference than what we had even in Trump's first term. You know, you don't need to go all the way back to Nixon. Trump's first term, you had Mitch McConnell as the Republican leader. You had Paul in the Senate. You had Paul Ryan, who was the Speaker of the House, both of whom had distinguished careers, followings, whatever. You may hate them, you may love them, but they were powerful people within the Republican Party long before Donald Trump came on the scene, and were not afraid to say when they disagreed with him. Now, in this extraordinary transition we have had that has basically all happened since he left office in disgrace in 2021, where he is the absolute dominant figure in the Republican Party, and there is nobody that can stand up and really even criticize him. You've got, you know, Rand Paul and Thomas Massey of Kentucky, both were, you know, have both been critical of Trump on a couple of areas because they're actual libertarian-leaning Republicans. So they don't like the bombing of the boats, you know, coming from Venezuela. They don't like the tariffs because that's what their position has been forever. And then Trump invites all the congressional Republicans to a big event at the White House, except for those two. So no, you're not going to see anybody stand up. By the way, I just one other thing on Nixon is Nixon in that David Frost interview that he famously did after he left the White House. It's not illegal if the president does it. That's yeah. Anyway.
You were in that chair last year before the election, interviewing an author the gist of whose book was that Trump had remade the GOP in his image.
And remade, yeah.
And I disagreed with that. I don't know what your answer either was. But I think ever since Ronald Reagan and the cast of characters, including Newt Gingrich and everyone else, has led the country to this what state we are in today. If it was not Trump, it would have been someone else. So it brings me to this question about, shouldn't eminent journalists like you be talking about the state of the country today? And I'm not saying you shouldn't be talking about the other things, but the most important thing, Marjorie Taylor Greene made this statement, she has made this twice, we need a divorce. And the country has become ungovernable. We seem to be on the cusp of a violent civil war. Nothing is really happening in Congress. We have a shutdown. And when she talks about a divorce, shouldn't journalists like you be talking about how we can peacefully talk about a referendum, a separation, so that we don't have a violent civil war? Why is there no talk about this situation?
Thank you for the. I mean, I think that we do spend time reporting on the state of the country, and I don't think the idea of a, you know, succession of the states is any better an idea now than it was in 1861. But I appreciate the comments.
Hey, Jonathan Raynard.
What's going on, man?
Hey, we're long overdue to catch up again, man. I can't wait to read this. I'm going to start tonight. Question for you is, one of the reasons the White House pays attention to Steve Bannon, he's a great analytical thinker. You can disagree with his conclusion, but he's phenomenal.
And I know you know Steve well. You've known him for a long time. Yes.
Very well. Trump is going to go down in history. As you may remember, I used to work for Old Man Bush.
Yeah, you were serious player. Yeah. 41.
Right, exactly. Question. I think Trump is going to go down in history as one of the most transformative presidents in the history of our country. Not because what you agree or disagree with.
By the way, that's probably true. So let me just say, I think that's true. Yes.
Yeah, and I deal a lot with a lot of foreign leaders, so I don't know if you deal with that in the book. I'll find out tonight. But if the Democrats think the way to regain power is to be Trump on steroids, they're going to be out of power for a generation. Trump told, I was amazed. Trump said last week at a press conference, "Let me tell the Democrats how to fight me." He said, "You don't string together 6 F-bombs in one sentence. You spread them out." And he was, being facetious, but the Democrats have got to do more than just double down on Trump. You can't imitate the originator. So tell me, do you think Trump will indeed go down as one of the most transformative presidents? I think he will. And again, it's regardless of whether you agree with his position. The way we approach geopolitics, domestic politics, Bill Gates hates Trump, but he's going to kiss his finger, and it would never go back to the way it used to be when Trump is long and gone.
Let me answer it. Good to see you, sir. Yes, I think Trump, and I write about this when you have to get to the conclusion of the book, but Trump is making changes that will far outlast his time as president, and he has shown that a president can govern through executive power. He's shown that Congress can be bypassed. He's shown that he can, challenge the courts. Now he hasn't actually straight on defied a judicial ruling yet, right, Katherine? You can.
Judge Boasberg might feel differently,
but he's
been debated.
But certainly he has people around him who think that he can just totally ignore these court rulings, and he has not taken that. But he's changing. He has had an impact on this country that will not be easily erased. Some of the things he's doing will be, turned over and erased, but that's my central theory in the book of why him coming back now is just radically different than when he came in the first time.
And I think we have time for one more because I know you guys have another event. I'd love to talk about this all night, as we so often do, but I think that you are the last question we have time for.
Is it fair to say that based on your discussions with Trump on the phone, that you think that he's got at least a streak of decency in him? And at the same time, do you think that the fact that Trump will take your calls and sort of talk to you as if he's got respect for you has made you underestimate the damage that he's already done and the damage he's likely to do in the future?
I mean, it's a fair question, and I appreciate it. I think it would be hard to read what I've written and to say that I'm underestimating any of that. Look, it's hard for me to answer your first question. I'll just say that there have been times where I've been just shocked at the lack of empathy to what other people are going through. There have also been times where I have had sense that, something seems to be getting through to him. One of those was the call after Butler, but obviously that didn't last. I also called him after Charlie Kirk was shot. Because I knew that Charlie Kirk wasn't just a conservative activist, but he was somebody who had spent a lot of time around Trump and who Trump genuinely liked. And had known for a long time. I mean, Charlie Kirk first was known by Trump before he was known by most people. And I said, guy, this is before we knew Kirk had died. And I just said, here we go. I'm so, sorry about what happened, and I know you're close to him, and I hope he's all right. And then he started talking about Kirk in the past tense. It was obvious that Trump knew he had died. He also said, so he said to me, this first comment to me is like, "Oh yeah, no, I know you must be really upset about that." And if you just read those words, you might think he was being sarcastic to me, like, "Oh yeah, like I'm sure you care." No, but he wasn't. I think he was really genuinely saying that. Then he said to me, Charlie actually liked you. I don't know why, but he actually liked you, which, by the way, I didn't know. But I got a sense that I was talking to somebody that was shaken by what he had just seen. I mean, it's not hard to imagine somebody you've just witnessed murdered in that horrific way. So I don't know if I've really answered your question, but
you have.
okay,
Good
thank you.
answers. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.